afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for today's presentation. My name is Marissa, an attorney with Legal Aid of North Carolina's Helpline. Today we have Lainey Harris presenting for us. If you are unfamiliar with the format of this event, first, Lainey is going to review a PowerPoint presentation. At the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. If at any point during the presentation you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A box on Zoom or the comment section on Facebook. We'll review all questions put in the chat boxes during the Q&A session at the end. Please remember that this is a public forum and Legal Aid is not representing you at this time. Lainey will go over this in more detail, but please remember to keep your questions as general as possible, as we cannot provide any legal advice specific to your individual situation. The session will end when there are no more questions, and regardless of where we are, we will have a hard stop at 4:30 p.m. With all that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Lainey to get us started.
Thanks, Marissa. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So like Marissa said, today we are talking about SNAP benefits, and we have four main topics that we're going to cover. The first being applying for SNAP benefits, as well as how to maximize your SNAP benefits, recertifying and knowing your rights in SNAP hearings or proceedings. So first, what even is SNAP? SNAP stands for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It's also commonly known as Food and Nutrition Services, FNS benefits, or by its old name of food stamps. And this is a government program that provides low-income households with money each month to help them purchase food. The money is put on a reusable EBT card, and it can only be used to purchase eligible food items. Applying for SNAP. There are several ways that you can apply, and you can choose whichever way works best for you. The first is in person at your local county Department of Social Services or DSS office. You can complete a paper application and either fax or mail it to your DSS office, or you can apply online through the ePass portal. If you want to apply in person, you have the right to file an application on the same day that you visit DSS during their regular office hours. Submitting the application, though, is not the end of the process. You'll also be interviewed by a caseworker. They may ask you to provide additional information as well. And if you would like more information on how to apply for SNAP benefits, you can visit this website with the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. They have a lot of really great resources about who may be eligible, how much you may be eligible for. They also have PDF copies of the form that you can use to complete and submit to DSS. They also have resources and forms available in Spanish as well as English. There are some basic eligibility rules for SNAP benefits. Generally, to be eligible, you must either be a citizen or have a certain immigration status that makes you eligible, a North Carolina resident at the time that you apply, and you need to meet income rules. There are also work requirements in place for certain people. These work requirements don't apply to everyone, but they do apply to some people, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later in the presentation. As far as immigrant eligibility, of course, U.S. citizens are eligible for SNAP, and there are some limited categories of immigrants who are also eligible. The first being lawful permanent residents or green card holders. There is a 5-year waiting period, though, for green card holders. They generally cannot get SNAP benefits until 5 years after they lawfully entered the U.S. People who are refugees or people who have been granted asylee status, as well as Afghan special immigrants and parolees, are all eligible for SNAP benefits as well without that 5-year waiting period. Importantly, not everyone in the household has to have an eligible immigration status. You can apply just for members of the household who do have either citizenship or an eligible immigration status. So for example, if there are parents in the household who do not have an eligible status, but the children are citizens, the parents can apply for SNAP benefits on behalf of the children and receive SNAP benefits for the children, even though the parents themselves are not eligible and the parents can't receive SNAP benefits for themselves. DSS cannot require you to provide a Social Security number for household members who are not applying for SNAP benefits. Many households are what's called categorically eligible. This means that they have income below 200% of the federal poverty level with no disqualified household members. This is important because for categorically eligible households, there is no asset or resource limit. So DSS will not ask questions about how much money is in the family's bank account, how many cars they have, or anything like that. They really are only looking at the monthly income that is coming in each month. And this chart here shows what the maximum income limit is by household size. There's also a felony controlled substance ban. So this prevents people who have certain drug-related felonies that they have been convicted of from getting SNAP benefits. Generally, this applies to convictions that are either in North Carolina, another state, or under federal law that happened on or after August 23rd, 1996. And it has to have been a felony that involved the possession, use, or distribution of a controlled substance. Those folks are going to be permanently disqualified from receiving SNAP benefits. However, though, there is an exception. This is for people who were convicted of a Class H or I drug felony. Those individuals can become eligible for SNAP benefits again if they have been disqualified for at least usually 6 months. So they've been released from custody or they finished their sentence for at least 6 months and they've complied with a referral to their local area mental health authority for a substance abuse assessment. These are the work requirements that I mentioned a little bit earlier. It's important to know that the work requirements only apply to people who are able-bodied adults without dependents. And this is a special category of people that we'll talk more about as well on our next slide. But if you are an able-bodied adult without dependents, you have to work 80 hours a month, which averages to about 20 hours a week, or be participating in a work program for 80 hours a month. This work can be a variety of things. It can be employment for wages, self-employment, volunteer work, work in exchange for goods or services, or a combination of any of these. And what's important here is the amount of hours that you work, not how much you're making. So if you are babysitting for a friend or a family member, 20 hours a week, even if you're not making minimum wage babysitting, because you are working at least 20 hours, it still counts to meet these requirements. Same thing with self-employment. You may not really be making much money, but if you are working 20 hours in that self-employment role, or volunteering where you're not making any money at all, but you're still volunteering and working with your time, 20 hours a week, you meet this requirement. There's also a good cause exception for people who would have worked the required 80 hours a month, but they missed a little bit of work for a good cause. They will still be considered to have met the work requirements and they won't be terminated from SNAP benefits if that absence from work was just temporary and they kept their job. So some examples could be getting sick, having a household emergency, or if your car breaks down and you can't get to work for a few days and you miss some hours, because that's something that is outside of your control and you kept your job, you can still be deemed to have met the work requirements. If you are an able-bodied adult without dependents and you are not meeting this work requirement and you don't meet any of the exemptions that we'll talk about, you can only get SNAP benefits for any 3 months in a 36-month period. These don't have to be consecutive, so you're pretty limited in your ability to get SNAP if you're an able-bodied adult without dependents who is not working. So these are the exemptions. So these are people who do not have to meet the work requirements. The first is just based off of age. So if you are under 18 or at least 55 years old, you don't have to meet the work requirements. If you're within a SNAP household that contains a member under age 18, you are also exempt. That minor in the household does not have to be related to you. You don't have to have any kind of responsibility for that minor. As long as they are within the SNAP household, it counts. So, for example, if there's a family with 2 parents and two children, let's say one of those children is 19 and one of those children is 16. The 16-year-old, because they're under 18, will make everyone in the household exempt from the SNAP work requirements, including their 19-year-old sibling, because they're within that same SNAP household. People who are pregnant or homeless do not have to meet the work requirements. Veterans also are exempt. And importantly for veterans, this is regardless of the conditions of their discharge. This is a recent change. So there may be veterans who previously were unable to get SNAP benefits because they weren't meeting the work requirements and maybe had something other than an honorable discharge. Those folks now can be exempt from the work requirements and get SNAP benefits. People who are between 18 and 24 and were also in foster care when they turned 18 are also exempt from the work requirements up to age 24. And then the last category is for people who are considered unfit for employment and therefore can't work and don't have to meet the work requirements. So this includes people who are receiving workers' compensation, disability benefits, or Medicaid based on a disability, as well as people who are getting unemployment benefits. If someone has been medically certified by a medical provider as unfit for employment, they don't have to meet the work requirements. Someone may be unable to work due to alcohol or drug addiction, or if they are at least a half-time student. I will just flag, though, that if you are a college student instead of a high school student, there are some other rules that apply as well, specifically to college students. And then lastly, if someone is just obviously unfit for work based on the caseworker's observation or judgment, they don't have to meet the work requirements. So if you are an able-bodied adult without dependents, it's very important that you report your work activity to DSS. And you should also report to DSS if you believe that you meet an exemption. Some of these exemptions require documentation, and DSS can help you get that. For example, the medically unfit to work. If you tell DSS that you believe you're unable to work due to a disability, they can send you the form that you would need to have a doctor fill out to certify that. I always remind people that you shouldn't assume that DSS already has your correct and updated information. A lot can change after you apply, so make sure that everything is correct with DSS and think, have you moved or has your phone number changed? That could impact DSS's ability to get in contact with you. If you've recently started work or if your work hours have changed, you may need to report that. Or if your living situation has changed, if you are pursuing disability or unemployment benefits, or if you become pregnant. These are all really important things to report to DSS to make sure that if you are an able-bodied adult without dependents, you're getting an exemption that you may be entitled to. Next, maximizing your SNAP benefits. So this chart here shows what the maximum monthly SNAP benefit is based on household size. It varies, though, household to household. So not every household is going to get the same or get the maximum. Instead, the County Department of Social Services determines the household's monthly SNAP benefit based on the household's income, household size, and certain expenses. Not all expenses are considered by DSS, just certain ones. And when I say household, generally that means people who live together and buy or cook food together. Higher monthly income usually means the household gets less SNAP benefits. However, though, if they do have higher of those monthly expenses that are counted, the household can receive more SNAP benefits. There are two different kinds of expense verifications, or just verifications in general. The first are required verifications. These are verifications that you have to provide for DSS in order for them to determine your eligibility for SNAP benefits and process your application. If you do not provide required verifications, you cannot get SNAP benefits. However, recommended verifications are just optional and you don't have to provide them, but they're used to determine your benefit levels. And so providing recommended verifications can help you get more SNAP benefits. So again, it's in your best interest to provide the recommended verifications. Some examples of required verifications are proof of identity or proof of citizenship or immigration status if requested. proof of household size or proof of who's in the household, Social Security number, again, only for those who are actually applying for the benefits, and then proof of household income. Those are all required if requested to process your application. Recommended verifications are verifications of these expenses that DSS counts. This can include utility expenses, mortgage or rental expenses, property taxes and insurance if you own your own home, medical expenses for specified persons, and these are just people who are elderly or disabled, child support payments that someone in the household is legally obligated to make and pays for a child who is not in the household, and then childcare expenses. Childcare expenses is a pretty broad expense. This can include a babysitter if you need a babysitter to work. It can include summer camps that are needed for you to work, as well as daycare type expenses. Recertifying for SNAP. Most SNAP households have to recertify every 6 months for their SNAP benefits. DSS starts this process by mailing the household a form that needs to be completed and returned to DSS by the 15th day of the last month of the certification period. It can be provided up to the end of the month after the certification period ends, but in that situation, the household is likely to have a lapse in their benefits. Providing it by the 15th day is the best way to have a continuation of your SNAP benefits with no potential break in between. You don't have to provide all of the verifications when you submit the recertification, but you do have to provide them for your application to ultimately be processed. So the best practice is to submit them all at the same time if you can. And here's an example to help us understand the dates. So let's say that a household is certified for SNAP benefits for 6 months from January 1st to June 30th. In probably either late May or early June, the household will get the recertification form. It looks a lot like the original application and it asks a lot of the same questions about who's in the household, if anyone works, what the income is. It's usually several pages. In order for that recertification to have been received timely, DSS needs to have the completed form by June 15th. Because remember, June 30th is the last day that the household is certified to get SNAP benefits. And so that gives DSS time to process it during the overlap so that the household can then continue to receive the benefits for July. There are certain changes during the certification period that have to be reported to DSS. The first is if an able-bodied adult without dependents stops working an average of 80 hours a month. Also, if anyone in the SNAP household receives lottery or gambling winnings of $4,250 or more, or if the household's income goes from below 130% of the federal poverty level to above 130% of the federal poverty level. And when the household applies or recertifies, they will receive a form from DSS that has this information, and it will have a chart that explains what that 130% level is so that the household knows what amount of income needs to be reported if it changes during the period. The household is not required to report other changes that include like an increase in expenses or a decrease in income, but reporting these changes may actually increase your SNAP benefits. And so it's in your best interest often to report those things as well. And then lastly, we're going to talk about SNAP appeals and knowing your rights in the appeals process. Most importantly, you do have appeal rights. If you disagree with an action taken by DSS that impacts your SNAP benefits, you pretty much always have appeal rights. And when I say appeal, I really am meaning requesting a hearing. It's the same thing. What you should do is read the written notice from DSS carefully. They have to send you a written notice when they take an action in your SNAP case. And that notice will explain your appeal rights, the deadline to appeal, and what you can do to try to get help. And just a reminder here, this is why it's really important that DSS has your correct and updated address, because so much of what they do is by mail. And if they don't have a good address for you, you could miss really important documents. There are two main types of SNAP hearings. The first are state fair hearings, and these are used to address issues related to eligibility for SNAP benefits, the actual benefit amount the household is receiving, as well as overpayments. The second kind are administrative disqualification hearings. These are more serious. They're only used for intentional program violations, which really are fraud situations. For the state fair hearings, an opportunity for a hearing must be provided to any household negatively impacted by a DSS action that affects their SNAP benefits. If you want to appeal, you need to make a clear statement to DSS that you want to talk to someone else, present your case to a higher authority that you disagree, anything along those lines that makes it clear to DSS that you are trying to appeal. This can be an oral or a written statement. I generally recommend making a written statement just so that it is clearly documented. However, if you are unable to do so, you can make an oral statement in person at DSS or over the phone by calling DSS. Generally, a request for a fair hearing must be made within 90 calendar days of the date on the DSS notice. If your benefits are being reduced and you disagree with that decision, in many cases, DSS must continue your SNAP benefits at the prior level if you request a hearing within 10 days. And these hearings are conducted by a state hearing officer with the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. So the hearing officer is not someone who works at your local DSS, it's someone who works for the state agency. And at the hearing, it would be the household, a representative from DSS, and then someone from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services will make the decision. Administrative disqualification hearings are used only when DSS believes that it has clear and convincing evidence that an individual in the SNAP household has committed one or more acts of intentional program violation. And these really are cases that involve allegations of fraud. An intentional program violation occurs when a household member knowingly, willfully, and with deceitful intent commits a fraudulent act. The key here is that it has to be something that was done on purpose. This is not mistakes or accidents. These are purposeful fraudulent actions. And they can include things like making false statements or hiding information to get SNAP benefits that the household is not actually eligible for. Misusing the EBT card, including selling or trading SNAP benefits to someone else, or using SNAP benefits to buy food for or share food with someone who is not in the SNAP household. If DSS believes that the household has committed an intentional program violation, they'll mail the household a notice letting them know that they're being accused of this. The notice will have the date for the local disqualification hearing, because remember, you have a right to a hearing before you are disqualified from SNAP benefits. DSS usually includes a waiver form with this notice that says you can agree to waive the hearing, not have the hearing, and just accept the consequences. You don't have to sign this waiver. You can if you want to, but there are some pretty serious consequences for intentional program violations, and you want to make sure that you understand those and are aware of those before you sign the waiver. The hearing officer for a local disqualification hearing is someone at DSS who has not been previously involved in the case. After the hearing officer must provide the household with a copy of the decision, and it often comes by certified mail. The SNAP household then has 15 calendar days from the date of the decision to appeal if they disagree with it. After the appeal, the household then has a brand new hearing that's a state level disqualification hearing. For this one, the hearing officer is someone from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. And this is a totally new hearing where the household and DSS will present all of the evidence and arguments again, and the hearing officer will make their own decision. Like I said, there are some pretty serious consequences of intentional program violations. If it is your first intentional program violation, you receive a 12-month SNAP disqualification. So you can't get SNAP benefits for 12 months. If it's your second intentional program violation, it's a 24-month SNAP disqualification. And if it's your third intentional program violation, that results in a permanent SNAP disqualification. If your program violation involved misrepresenting where you live or who you are so that you could get multiple different benefits, usually across multiple states, that specifically results in a 10-year SNAP disqualification. These disqualifications, though, only apply to the person in the household who actually committed the program violation. So other people in the SNAP household can still get SNAP benefits. They're not necessarily disqualified. It's just the person who actually did the action. So, for example, if there's a family of a parent and two children, if the parent committed an intentional program violation and is disqualified, the children can still receive, they're still eligible for SNAP benefits, and the parent can still receive SNAP benefits for the children, even though the parent themselves is not eligible. I do also want to flag, though, that often intentional program violations result in an overpayment because the household received benefits that they weren't actually eligible for, or the household has to pay back the benefits that they misused. So there is also an overpayment of money that has to be paid back in addition to the disqualification. And for this one, all adult members of the SNAP household are jointly responsible for paying back the SNAP benefits that the household should not have received. So even if other adult household members didn't commit the program violation or didn't even know that it happened, all of those adult members of the household are considered jointly responsible for repaying. Household has rights during the hearing process. Before the hearing, the household or a representative that they choose has the right to review the case file and records that DSS plans to use at the hearing. The household can choose to represent themselves in the hearing, get legal counsel, or have another person represent them. The household can bring their own witnesses and submit any evidence that they believe will help explain their case. Depending on the situation, evidence could include things like records, receipts, statements from other people, things like that. The household can question or challenge any testimony or evidence that's presented by DSS, and the household can request a postponement or a continuance of up to 30 days if they need more time to prepare for the hearing or try to get legal counsel. And now I'm happy to take questions if anybody has any questions. Remember, though, like Marissa said, I can't give specific legal advice on your particular situation. But if you have any general questions, or if you would like information or clarification on anything that I said, I'm happy to talk through that. And this slide here has information on how to contact legal aid if you think that you need legal representation with your SNAP benefits. It has our general helpline number, as well as our senior helpline for those who are 60 and older. You also can apply online as well through our website.
All right, as Lainey said, now is the time for questions. I'm not seeing any questions at the moment. You do need to put your questions either in the Q&A box on Zoom or the comment section on Facebook. This is not a forum where you can unmute. So I'm just going to give it just a few moments to see if any questions come in, as well as I put a link to our website for those who might be interested in applying for legal aid services online in the chat for everyone. Since I am not seeing any questions, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you all for joining us with a special thank you to Lainey for presenting. If you would like to review any of the information that we discussed today, we have posted a recording of today's event to our Facebook page. It will be immediately available. You can access the recording as well as recording of other Listen and Learns with the at www.facebook.com/legalaidnc. You do not need a Facebook account to access the recordings. If you would like to register for one of our other Listen and Learn programs, such as on Medicaid, which is tomorrow, simple divorce, child custody, tenant rights, you can do so on our website at legalaidnc.org/clinics. Thank you all so much, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.